time is a really interesting one. For me, Gamban has been one hell of a distraction. If you ask me about my sort of recovery journey, and I do think of myself in constant recovery, developing Gamban and putting in the energy that's been needed into this project has given me purpose.
Hello and welcome to the Invisible Addiction podcast. If you're a new listener, hi. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to this episode. And of course, if you're a long-time listener of the podcast, I hope you've been keeping well. Shortly, we'll be hearing a young man's gambling addiction story and how it led him to create a gambling blocking software company. But before we go any further, I'd like to make a short disclaimer and say that this is an informational podcast. If you're experiencing gambling problems, of course, I hope you relate to the stories you hear, but please do seek professional help. Links to that support can be found on the Invisible Addiction website, www.theinvisibleaddiction.com/support. Right, without further ado, let's crack on with the podcast. Okay, so joining us on the other end of the line today is Jack Symons from Southampton. He's come onto the podcast to share his gambling addiction story and to tell us more about Gamban, a gambling software company he founded in 2015. It gives me great pleasure to welcome him onto the Invisible Addiction podcast. Jack, thanks for joining us today. How are you doing?
I'm fine, thanks, Alex. Thanks for having me today. It's Friday, so I'm tired, but looking forward to a weekend. Yeah, very well. How are you?
Yeah, good. Well, hopefully we can kind of ease you into the weekend nicely with this recording. So, yeah, we're going to talk a bit more about Gamban, I suppose, later on. But for the listeners' benefit, could you perhaps just introduce yourself, maybe just briefly for a minute or so, just sort of talk about your background and experience, where you grew up, etc., etc.
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in London and moved down to the south coast when I was about 10. I've always sort of been based in the UK, apart from a short stint living in Norway, in and around Oslo. I've had or experienced gambling problems since the age of, I don't want to say, but I around about 14, I think, was when I was first sort of experiencing gambling. Not necessarily harm, although obviously if you're gambling at 14, it's probably quite harmful in terms of your development. University, I went to the University of Surrey. University was where I was sort of, if you like, let loose into the world and able to had access to money, independence. I was living by myself. It was quite a lonely experience. I took to gambling, particularly online poker, and really from there onwards, it took a long time between recognizing that there was a growing problem and doing something about it. But that's sort of my background relating to gambling.
Great stuff. So yeah, gambling, you mentioned it started, around, was it 14 you said?
I think so, yeah. It's difficult. I've got a terrible sort of chronological memory, but something around that sort of age. It was before I was technically allowed to gamble.
Sure. And was that in Norway? Or
No. So when I was in Norway, this would have been about 2013. I was gambling in Norway on online. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Sure. So how did you? Yeah. I mean, let's sort of dive into the gambling side of things. So yeah. How did you start? How did you get involved?
Well, for me, it was online poker. Poker had always been sort of, if you like, more of a. I suppose that there's the skill element of poker and there's the gambling element of poker. To me, poker did seem like a bit of a harmless activity, and really for me it kind of was. The problem really started, I can't remember which platforms did this, but it was sort of in the top right hand corner if I remember correctly, and they start introducing sort of very simple casino games onto the poker screen. So you'd be playing your hand, you'd be, if you like, to use a poker term, sort of grinding it out. But you'd also be able to do these kind of like simple blackjack, roulette games in the top corner. So I'd be playing these games whilst slowly and almost meditatively playing poker. And I was just playing more and more of these games, and so that sort of paved the way into more of the casino games rather than the sort of the online poker side of things. And before I knew it, I was playing those video slots and all kinds of different, more exciting and volatile products. So I think that's kind of where things started to become a bit problematic for me.
For sure. It's interesting. I mean, I've never really been able to play poker. Firstly, because I'm not very good at it. I mean, I've played with my friends and stuff, but I come into this completely naively. I didn't realize that you could play poker, and then on the top right-hand corner, you could play the other games. That's
yeah. I think it was a way of the land-based casinos also benefit from this as well. If I didn't have the kind of that, if I didn't have that level of harm or capacity for harm now, I'd still want to. Obviously, you can't at the moment, but due to the pandemic. But playing poker in casinos, you've also got the problem of those machines and table games in the breaks, and so typically, if there was an environment where I could literally just play poker, I'd possibly continue to do that. But it's those other sort of games that are so tempting, and so immediate, and so and as you, I'm sure it's not necessarily sort of a small amount of money that is the problem. It's the small amount of money that leads to a larger amount of money, and you start chasing your losses and so on, and it becomes an issue. But yeah, so that's sort of how I started with gambling. And I'm very much of the mindset that it's that sort of, it's what's happening in your brain when you're doing it. It's not the actual activity itself. So fairly meaningless whether it's slots, table games, gaming, the convergence of gambling, investing, and gaming, gambling, and investing, all becoming sort of quite similar in terms of that excitement, stimulus, distraction, escapism thing. It all sort of, I think, is all part of the same thing.
Did you, when you went into sort of play poker, was it for that escapism, or was it for the mindset of making money?
A bit of both. So the social poker, the sort of playing poker with friends, I don't really consider that a problem. I've always thought of that for myself as a fun thing to do, as a kind of it's interesting because the old stereotype that men don't talk is probably inaccurate. Men do talk, possibly with a pint in their hands or some cards in their hands. That for me was always kind of a fun activity, and I miss playing poker, not necessarily because I can't, but because I can't at the moment. I find the social poker is very different. Online poker, yeah, it's you can while away your time playing it. I know I've said before. I think there were days where I'd spend maybe 14 hours playing it, and you go into that sort of trance, don't you? And if whatever your poison is, you just sort of tune out and then tune into whatever you're doing, and that's why you hear of these people at the slot machines in Las Vegas, playing days on end. It's that. It's unbelievable. I have a really short attention span for the most part. Playing a computer game, I can put in 45 minutes and then I'm just bored and have to do something else. But it surprises me that my mind is able to sort of stay with gambling for so long. It's bizarre. The fact that it can actually hold your attention, which is otherwise, fairly scattered, is quite surprising.
Yeah, I can definitely relate a lot to that. Yeah, spending hours in the casinos and thinking, oh, it's 3:00 in the morning. Like, how did it get to this time?
Yeah, it's scary.
Yeah, it's really scary. It's really scary. So just in terms of like timeline, how old are you at this point? Are you at university? Is this going on then?
Yeah, so I was at university from about 18 to 21, 22. I wouldn't say it was towards the end of my time at university. It wasn't such a problem. It wasn't really that prevalent. I think if you're familiar with the famous science experiment Rat Park, I think there's a lot of truth to that. The idea that if you change your circumstances and you have better connection, there's sort of less need for that escapism, that sort of behaviour. In the case of the rat, I think it was cocaine or something like that, heroin even maybe. In the case of my experiences, certainly gambling was a reflection maybe of maybe I don't think I was necessarily that happy. I was looking for something to distract myself, something to sort of fill a void. I don't even today. I can't work out quite where it came from, whether or not there was an element of it just being an exciting and fun thing to do to combat boredom, or whether or not there's something sort of deeper going on that I possibly that was just the coping mechanism for it. But yeah, 18 to sort of 20 were quite not to be, and I'll be honest, they weren't necessarily the most expensive years, but they were like the gambling. I don't think the amount lost and the harm are necessarily completely mutually exclusive, I think, or perhaps they are. Wrong choice of words. The sort of the measurement that is quite difficult to articulate is the dependency, the how much you need that gambling in your life. It's not how long you play or how much you play necessarily. It's what it fills and what it represents to you. So the kind of the longish build up to devoting my time to Gamban was following a house fire of my family's house in Sussex. It was a thatched house. I was living there while after having moved back from Norway. I was kind of house sitting, if you like. My family were away on holiday. World's worst house sitter here. So we had an open fire in the lounge going, and it was basically cooking the inside of the house. The house went up in flames, lost everything. We decided to move further along the coast, and working out what it is we were going to do. And so in this sort of halfway house, a kind of house that we as a family rented, and just while we work out what we're doing, where we're going, we had that house for about a calendar year, and I was gambling. At this point, I knew I was aware that it was still a problem, but I buried my head in the sand a long time ago, and it wasn't really that much of an issue. I wasn't stealing. I wasn't really borrowing. I was in an overdraft at all times, but it wasn't much of an issue, or at least it wasn't a huge issue to me at that time, obviously. And I was gambling, and I was playing on a slot machine one night in this house. I hit. It wasn't the major progressive. I remember it so vividly. It wasn't like the 3.9 million. It was it was actually the third highest one, and it equated to something like £30,000. And it triggered that came through, and I was just like totally in shock. I didn't understand. I didn't think you could actually like properly win, and that to me, that wasn't like sort of the ups and downs. That was the up. And in order to get that money out, I had to do all kinds of crazy things in terms of wagering requirements. So I was betting sort of £5,000 pounds a hand on multi-line video poker. So we're talking, in fact, I got 4 to a straight flush, held 10 times, if this makes any sense, which basically means that if any card came down that was, let's say, a 10 of spades, it would be £60,000 per hand.
Wow.
I got a couple of straights, but I didn't get the straight flush. In any case, even in that process of trying, for me, it was the process of trying to clear those funds that completely changed. I know that wasn't sort of money that I deposited, but I was playing with money that just about felt real, and wagering more than I would ever wager if I had deposited that money. I managed to get that money out, and took out about £30,000. So try telling someone who's won money that has kind of, to some people that wouldn't touch the sides, but to me that was a lot of money, and to a lot of people it would be too. Try telling someone that they can't win after they've won.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I used some of that money for, I basically, in that win, it completely solidified and validated any of the time in the past that I gambled. So anytime I was a loser in the past for gambling, I made as much money as I probably would have made in an annual salary back then, in one evening, and less than an evening, in a couple of hours. So I felt like a winner, and if it happened then, it can happen again. It can't, but it could. That's the thing. It can't. In any case, we're dealing with something quite complex here, and over time, and not a particularly long time, I'm sure I handed all of that money plus some back. We'd moved house again, and I was I hadn't been involved in any project or like technology venture, which was kind of my interest following a previous venture. So I thought, like, is there anything that I could be doing to solve this problem? Whilst also having used a lot of the other tools, which really didn't help me that much. Other alternative blocking software, parental control software. And this is probably the most important part of the Gamban story. It's just, I felt like I had to, if I was going to say I have a problem and I needed some sort of help with that, I needed something that worked for me, and there was nothing. I mean, nothing. In fact, what there was, I would say, it was in some ways worse than nothing. The parental control software is great at protecting your kids from doing things they shouldn't be doing online. That's what parental control software is. And I was using that basically in that infantilizing way of trying to treat myself like a child, because I knew that it was the inner child who was gambling. It wasn't the adult. So it's not their fault, but that was as close as I could get to a solution. And then other blocking software either didn't work on the systems I used, or just didn't work at all. And looking back, I fully respect. I mean, it's no easy feat, and we're constantly improving as well, and it's a constantly moving track. But it's such an important thing, having this kind of barrier in place, and that really was the start of Gamban in 2015. We wanted something that would be compatible, fairly lightweight. If you were willing to make massive compromises, you could downgrade your phone to something that wouldn't allow you to access anything sort of internet related. So there's always that option. But I'd heard of people freezing their cards in blocks of cloudy, icy water. So long as they don't remember their number. I heard of people sending their cards back to themselves in the post. I think I think, when you're able to start seeing quite resourceful and zany ways of tackling a problem, there's often a solution that just around the corner. And I think that was really the it felt important, and as well as good, to be doing something that I knew almost everything there was to know about in terms of the relief and the support that product could give.
Wow. That's it's quite the story, really. The fact that you can kind of use your experience and turn it on its head, which I'm sure would massively empower your own self-worth, as it were, and knowing that you're creating this bit of kit that is potentially helping thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people throughout the world. Just before we get into the nuts and bolts of Gamban and plans for the future and such like, what tips and advice would you give others that are perhaps listening to this podcast that are experiencing gambling problems or have experienced gambling problems? What advice would you give them? Okay,
so there's two things. First of all, I needed someone to tell me this at the time. You're not going to win that money back. So you need to draw a line under it and move on. And it's okay. It's okay that you lost money. It's okay that you find yourself out of control. These are products that are designed to be addictive, so don't be surprised that you're addicted. So part one, I think, is acceptance and self-compassion, and spend some time around that. Part two are the practical steps, and time, access, and money are like the heat triangle. If you think about it from sort of fuel, heat, and oxygen, I guess are the three ingredients needed to make a fire. Time, access, and money are the ingredients that sort of allow or facilitate continued harm. So really, you want to kind of be looking to remove one, or even preferably two, or even all three of those components. So step one, find it within yourself to underline your losses and move on, and accept that you've lost and it's okay. Step two, access, time, and money. So access is an area that's quite well catered for at the moment. I'm sure we'll talk about this shortly, but Talk Ban Stop in the UK, or Gamban outside of the UK. Talk Ban Stop is an initiative that if you call up the helpline or live chat, if you don't feel ready to call, they'll help you. They'll talk with you. They'll listen compassionately. Equally, if you don't want to talk that much, you don't have to, but you can obtain our software Gamban for free. You'll also get, if you haven't already signed up to GamStop, you'll be told about GamStop. So the access part, you're blocking yourself, you're blocking your name, your details from being able to sign up with a licensed and regulated gambling operator, gambling site or platform. The blocking software sits on your devices, so you install it on all your devices, and you won't be able to access the gambling sites or apps. Money is an interesting one. The banks offer a really good service in terms of merchant code blocking. So you've got time and access, hopefully kind of taken quite nicely there. Try and get all of those things, because you might as well. There's no point really in installing or doing one of those. Try and get them all. It provides the best coverage, the best block. And then time, right? Time is a really interesting one. For me, Gamban has been one hell of a distraction. If you ask me about my sort of recovery journey, and I do think of myself in constant recovery, developing Gamban and putting in the energy that's been needed into this project has given me purpose. It's given me a reason. It's filled whatever hole I had in the past. So for me, that was time. And it might be that you need to find a cause that you believe in. It might be that you need to start a new venture. It might be that you decide to throw yourself into a new hobby. It might be that you help others. It might be a change of job. I don't know what it is, but time is often an overlooked piece of that. It might be therapy, and therapy or treatment is also a good use of your time. But those three things are where I'd be looking, and that's quite a nice framework, I think, for getting that into place and coupling that up with some treatment. That's what I would suggest to anyone going through those problems.
That's absolutely brilliant. So time, access, and money. Yeah, I've heard.
And self-compassion.
Right.
It's so difficult to move on. I need it. It was both my mum and my dad. I needed them to basically, when I told them, I needed someone else to say, forget the past. Like, you've lost that money, it's gone. Because I still felt that sort of ledger line that I've still got to keep going, because I've got to win back that money, because otherwise I'm a loser because I've lost. And I just needed someone else. And if for others that can be me on this podcast or elsewhere, I just needed someone to say, that money that you gambled, you lost it. I don't even mind if they tell me I'm a bloody idiot. And it's gone, and you're not going to be able to get that back. The horrible thing about gambling is that the person gambling may feel that they could win that money back in the next spin, and it would be ridiculous of me to say that's not possible. But if you go down that route, the difference between looking into the abyss and falling into the abyss, I think you get to a point where you look at this and you say, it is so understandable why people get into sort of that perpetual cycle of harm with gambling, that you can cut yourself a bit of slack as well. I'm not saying that this isn't something where you don't have to take personal responsibility. You do. But as I said before, say you've got addicted to something that's designed to be addictive. What's the shame there? I'm sorry, I don't see it.
No,
and we know that these products are inherently designed to be. I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with this. I don't know if this is apocryphal or whatever, but supposedly these kind of fairy tale design slot games, some say that they're designed to appeal to children, some say they're designed to retain to sort of make adults feel more sort of regressed and immature and therefore irresponsible. There's another school of thought still that believes that, let's take Jack and the Beanstalk. In the case of Jack and the Beanstalk, the central character in that slot game is Jack, and he's on your side and you're on his side, and you don't want to let the central character down. He's with you. And so it's built to sort of, there's a storyline there, there's a bonus kind of thing that sort of plays out, and if you keep on playing, it's basically, if you look at the way it's designed on a fundamental level, it's designed to keep me playing and to sort of not condition me, but to make me feel that I've got a companion in this game. And bear in mind, as we pointed out earlier, the idea that this is a very cerebral thing and that we are engaged and we are in a trance, it's difficult for non-gamblers to understand. But all the different sort of psychological things going on. And you know, I don't know if this kind of stuff actually permeates through to the Gambling Act review and sort of the wider reform. But if we actually think about it from a problem gambler's perspective, or a gambler's perspective, before it becomes a problem, you have to think about the way that these games impact the player in the moment. I know it's a bit of a rabbit hole to go down, but it's so important. I mean, if we're going to protect people, we should at least know where the harm is, or on what sort of level the harm is being caused.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, just on that note, then, what are your thoughts on the Gambling Act review? What would you like to see implemented, as it were?
So, firstly, obviously the last Gambling Act, 2005, time has moved on a lot since then. So we've got, you know, the ability to gamble pretty much any time now on mobile devices. I'd like to see technology, both in terms of the capacity for harm and also the capacity for protection, explored in more detail. So tools that support and protect. Also the convergence of gaming, gambling, and investing, where the lines have become more blurred. I mean, particularly around. I mean, this is an interesting area that we struggle with at Gamban. It's how do we define what a gambling product is? Can we get some closure on the wretched spread betting and binary options debacle that is, you know, which regulator regulates it? I mean, at the moment, FCA regulate spread betting and binary options, and yet they're betting products, they're gambling products. The clue's in the name, spread betting. To me, it's absolutely absurd that these are not regulated by the Gambling Commission. So I'd like in this Gambling Act review to at least get some clarity on that. Once it's established as a gambling product, we're going to be a lot better able to decide whether these sites should be accessible or inaccessible. Carolyn Harris made a point around reclassifying sort of the, if you like, the charity raffles against other licensed operators, and I completely agree. Again, for us, we have to make a margin call on some of these charity sites. In fact, in an evaluation on blocking software effectiveness back in 2018, we didn't get 100% coverage because we made a decision not to block Marie Curie Cancer Research, Great Ormond Street, but even though they are licensed operators with a raffle on their websites. What are we going to do? Block Great Ormond Street? For, you know, what if you need to access that site? It's a legitimate, very valuable resource. Yes, they've got a raffle. Does it have the so we do have to make these kind of judgment calls. I'd like the Gambling Act to at least give a little bit more definition to what constitutes gambling in an environment that is so fast paced and I suppose this review is going to need to be sort of a series of reviews, and it's going to have to be so agile over the next 5 years to stay on top of the gaming, gambling, and investing sphere. I mean, just really to wrap up on that point, we talk a lot about loot boxes, but loot boxes is just one. I don't know why loot boxes get so much time in the spotlight. What about the sites that allow you to gamble with your skins as a form of currency? What about the sites that allow you to gamble with not crypto wallets? I think cryptocurrency is a perfectly realistic and rational asset to hold at the moment. Although I can understand that there is a volatility piece there. What about sites that are the issue that we face as well, are sites that have asset management and sort of trading components, and then the gambling products that are, you know, the CFDs and the options and the products that are, you know, very much sort of binary options and spread betting. are the two that spring to mind. Yeah. So I think this Gambling Act review, to assume that we're going to be able to get to a complete position in this one review is unlikely. It's going to have to remain agile and be a sort of iterative process.
That's really interesting. No, really interesting. So Jack, I mean, how did, well, we know how Gamban sort of came about, but could you maybe sort of loosely, sort of lightly touch on like what you're up to right now, what the future holds, what are your biggest challenges, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, sure. So the UK market is quite a mature market in terms of gambling, regulated gambling. And at the moment, Gamban is in a pilot with GamStop and GamCare under the you probably heard of Talk Ban Stop. This has been really, really positive experience so far. The feedback has been great. The idea is that all these tools are available together, which makes it easier for the individual in that state of mind looking to take a first step. So in the UK, things are going pretty well, and it'll be interesting to see sort of how this progresses. But I think this has been a very positive step, and it's good to see this technology being used in this way. In Norway, Gamban is distributed through the state monopoly, and that was a tender that was won, I think, a few years ago. But that's kind of underway. It's been a bit slow, but it was announced fairly recently, so I think that should pick up. We're available worldwide as a resource. I think, unfortunately, some of the markets that we're in and we're ready to help in just aren't ready for these tools. And there's two things. First of all, people aren't aware that there are resources available. If you search sort of for keyword traffic on Google, in the US, for example, where we are quite active, the search terms aren't very high. So it makes for a lousy commercial rationale or justification to enter the market. That's not the reason why we do what we do, though. So we kind of have to invest quite a lot in education and awareness, so that if we use the analogy that I've heard now 1 billion times around the US, it's that there's a tidal wave of problems coming. I don't know if that's the case or not. I think that might be sort of just one of those terms that's a bit of rhetoric that keeps going around and around. But my hope is that if it is a big wave, let's say, that I hope that wave doesn't have to crash, create a whole load of problems, and then all kinds of solutions then have to come into the mix to fix those problems. My hope is that the organizations involved will learn from some of the mistakes that have happened over here, and seek not to go through that inevitable problematic period that we've had to go through over here with all, and inevitably what comes with that are it'll come with activists, campaigners, it'll come with, more seriously, it'll come with relationship breakdowns, suicide, mental health problems. So I think they've got a real opportunity to get things kind of right from the outset, but I'm not seeing that at the moment. We're also seeing that in one of the states with the highest traffic or volume for Gamban is actually, strangely, it's California. where gambling online isn't legal. The black market is still very prevalent. So one of the benefits that we have is that, it's a block for all gambling, not just regulated gambling, including the skins gambling and the crypto gambling and the emerging products. Communicating that message is a different matter altogether. So, it's one of those kind of, we've got the tools ready, they're available. My hope is that the organizations that are out there at the coalface are distributing and raising awareness of what to do if or when things start becoming problematic. But at the moment, it's in some of these markets, it's very slow. It's frustrating, not because we're British, we know how to do it better. They hate that over there. And not because we have sort of a crystal ball and we know exactly what's going to pan out, but there are some really easy, quick wins, and it just seems to be across the board moving in quite a slow space in the US. In other markets, it seems to be a bit more progressive. It seems that there's a bit more appetite for other parties stepping up to tackle the complex problems. It's been great to see the banks in the UK rise to the challenge, especially when they haven't needed to. I mean, this was a bit of a sort of, it was kind of an experimental piece that Starling and Monzo did to start with, and then sort of the other banks, I think, were sort of I don't want to say shamed into it, but I think the clunkier the dinosaurs, let's say, I probably shouldn't say that, the more established banks, they actually moved really quickly with their customer vulnerability and gambling harm prevention pieces, and I was really impressed at how quickly they moved.
Sorry, Jack, interrupt. How did that come about? Was that from like the ground up? Was that from customers getting in touch with the banks and saying, "Look, this is what I'm experiencing"? How did they pick up on this?
Okay, so as I understand it, I won't name names, but of those two, the challenger banks that I mentioned before, one of them looked at sort of the top 10 merchants in the UK and found sort of in and amongst the usual suspects, Tesco, and I think they also found then 2 high street betting companies, and they thought, okay, well, something probably needs to be done. And then the other one basically had a bit of time set aside every month for sort of developer creativity, and this is what they came up with. And they both found that there was tremendous uptake. And it's interesting to see one of these challenger banks just posted, I think about 250,000 people have activated their block.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's huge.
It's massive. Admittedly, I think some of those people weren't problem gamblers. They were people who perhaps didn't gamble anyway, so it was added security on their account. But notwithstanding, it was still impressive. And then, in terms of the bigger banks, or not necessarily the bigger banks, sorry, the more established banks following suit. From what I can see, and forgive me if I've missed any of the sort of the key players out, but I know that money and mental health played a strong role. I know GambleAware played a pretty strong role in just putting a little bit of pressure on the banks. I don't quite know what was going on behind the scenes, but whatever happened worked because, and I think the people involved in these banks also recognized that there was something that needed to be done, and they moved, I think, unbelievably quickly, given the concerns around legacy systems, pieces around, I think, misplaced censorship and sort of removing consumer controls. And of course, now to this day, we're still seeing sort of cool-off periods in trying to deactivate the block being sort of something of a mixed bag. I think one bank offers 48 hours, another bank offers 2 weeks, another bank they allow you to toggle on and off. So it's kind of interesting to see what they've all kind of come to. But I'd like to see some sort of standards across the board for the bank blocking piece. Otherwise, people are willing to switch banks for gambling blocks, and we've seen this. We saw in an impact piece we conducted, or rather that was conducted fairly recently, so end of 2020. We found a very high proportion of people would be willing to switch banks to a bank that offered them some form of bank blocking, merchant code protection. So clearly there's a need, and it's valued. What was kind of interesting actually is it was the banks that, so of the banks that didn't, or that still haven't to this day, implemented some kind of banking block, such a quick and powerful movement took place that now the ones that don't offer a banking block are kind of being shamed into implementing that functionality. So it's kind of where before it was considered a bonus if your bank offered this functionality, it's now completely changed, and it's almost now sort of an expected component in the toolkit. So yeah, it's interesting. I'd love to see the same sort of discussions playing out with ISPs, internet service providers, and this is another piece that I'll be discussing in the Gambling Act review sort of discussions as we lead up to it. I think this is a really important component in terms of access, and yes, there are issues around censorship and protection, but where people say, look, I've got a problem and I need to do something about it, or where it concerns the black market, and we talk about tax theft and lack of player protection, it's important.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Now, Jack, I'm fully aware of time. So just before we wrap up, have you got anything else you'd like to add, where people can find you? Anything else? Any other business, as they would say? Yeah, sure.
So if you want to find out more about Gamban, go to gamban.com. If you are in the UK, go to talkbanstop.com, or you can find more information about talkbanstop at gamban.com as well, if that's easier to remember. Feel free to get in touch. We're a friendly bunch and we've been there before. And I just want to say, Alex, continue what you're doing at the Invisible Addiction podcast, because it's so important. Like, I think the alienation that people feel when they're going through it, that's something you're able to help a lot with, and it's recognised.
Thank you ever so much, Jack. That makes you. Oh, you've warmed my heart. Thank you. That's very kind of you to say. Thank you. Thank you very, very much. Well, thanks so much for coming on the podcast and giving up your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks, Alex.
Excellent, Jack. Speak to you soon. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. Lots to take away from Jack's story. How could you relate? Like Jack, were you a poker player? Did you progress on to other types of gambling like online slots, roulette, blackjack? Have you quit gambling and started a successful business? Let me know. Let's start a conversation. Feel free to drop me a comment on YouTube, message on social media, or get in touch with me confidentially via email, info@theinvisibleaddiction.com. In the next episode, I'll be speaking to Alex Norris, Labour and Co-op MP for Nottingham North and Shadow Public Health Minister. Really looking forward to that one and hearing his views and how he's going to hopefully make gambling a public health priority. In the meantime, thanks once again, guys. Enjoy the rest of your day. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.